I've seen every kind of live TV disaster, but nothing compared to the day Steve Harvey, the unflappable king of daytime, raised his hand and drew it across his own throat on national television. Of all the live TV disasters I've been a part of, and trust me, after 15 years as a production assistant, I've seen my share. Number 30 is the one that still makes my blood run cold. It wasn't a wardrobe malfunction or a contestant fainting under the hot lights. It was the day the laughter died on the set of Family Feud. The day Steve Harvey, the unflappable king of daytime TV, lost control of his kingdom in the span of about 7 seconds. It was a Tuesday taping, the second show of the day, and the energy was electric. We had the Millers versus the Garcias. The Millers were this picture-perfect family from Ohio. Mom, dad, 2 grown sons, all with matching pastel polo shirts and blindingly white teeth. The Garcias were a loud, hilarious family from Miami who treated every answer like a World Cup goal. The audience loved them. Steve was in his element, riffing off their answers, his signature mustache twitching with barely contained laughter. It was a perfect show, smooth, funny, hitting all its marks. I was just off stage, headset on, listening to the director call camera shots, my main job at that moment being to make sure Steve's water bottle was full during the next commercial break. Everything was normal, painfully, beautifully normal. The final round was about to begin. The Millers had clawed their way back, and it all came down to this. Mr. Miller, the patriarch, a soft-spoken man who looked like he spent his weekends coaching Little League, stepped up to the podium opposite Steve. The director's voice crackled in my ear. "Camera 3, get a tight shot on Miller. Camera 1, stay on Steve. Let's capture the tension." Steve leaned into his microphone, the familiar opening line on the tip of his tongue. "All right, David," he began. "For $200,000 and a brand-new car, we asked 100 people." He paused, doing his classic bit where he lets the anticipation build. The audience was leaning forward in their seats, but Mr. Miller wasn't looking at the big board. He wasn't even looking at Steve's face. His eyes were down. Then I saw it. From my angle near the side curtain, I had a clear view of the podium. Mr. Miller's hand, which had been resting at his side, came up. He was holding a small folded piece of paper, a simple white note card. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed it across the glossy surface of the podium until it stopped right in front of Steve's hands. It wasn't an aggressive move. It was quiet, methodical. It was the quietness of it that made the hairs on my arm stand up. Steve stopped mid-sentence. His eyes flicked down to the note, then back up to Mr. Miller's face. The audience didn't see the note. They just saw the pause. They probably thought it was part of the act, another one of Steve's hilarious, drawn-out reactions. A few people tittered nervously, but we, the crew, saw the change. The smile didn't just fade from Steve Harvey's face, it was stolen. The warm, crinkly-eyed host was gone, replaced by a man looking at something he couldn't comprehend. His whole body went rigid. In my headset, the chatter went from routine to frantic. "What was that?" "What did he give him?" the director asked. "Camera 3, can you see what's on that paper? Zoom in." But the angle was wrong. All we could see was Steve's frozen expression. He didn't open the note. He just stared at it, then back at Mr. Miller, who was now looking at him with a placid, almost serene expression. It was the most unsettling thing I'd ever seen. Steve subtly tapped his earpiece, a prearranged signal for when something is seriously wrong. It was the signal we all dreaded, the one we'd drilled for but prayed we'd never see. It meant, kill the show, but don't make it obvious. The problem was, How do you do that in front of a live studio audience of 300 people? The director's voice was tight with panic. Okay, Stan, get ready to play the theme music. We're going to a commercial. On my cue. But Steve didn't give the cue. He didn't toss to commercial. He just stood there, locked in a silent standoff with this quiet man from Ohio. An eternity passed in about 3 seconds. Then Steve did something I'll never forget. He looked directly into camera one, his camera. His eyes were wide, not with comedy, but with genuine, primal fear. He raised his hand, not in a wave, but flat, like a blade, and he drew it sharply across his own throat. In the control booth, that's the signal for Armageddon. It means cut everything. It means black. The director screamed into the headset, "Cut! Cut it now! Kill the feed!" The jumbotron behind the families flickered and died. The studio lights went out, plunging the entire soundstage into a shocking, disorienting darkness. The only light came from the red emergency exit signs, casting a hellish glow over the silent, confused faces in the audience. The sound cut. The music stopped. All you could hear was the collective gasp of 300 people and the frantic, terrified whispers of the crew in my headset. In the middle of it all, standing in the eerie red glow, Steve Harvey hadn't moved, and across from him, Mr. Miller was no longer looking at Steve. He had turned his head slightly, and his calm, serene smile was now fixed directly on me. My blood didn't just run cold, it froze solid in my veins. The world narrowed to that single, horrifying image, a man who had just brought a national television show to its knees, smiling at me as if we were sharing a private joke. My headset was a cacophony of panicked voices, but I couldn't make out a single word. My brain was stuck on a loop. He sees me. How does he see me? Why is he looking at me? Then the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the studio in a sterile, half-lit purgatory. The audience's confusion erupted into full-blown panic. People were on their feet, shouting questions, a wave of noise and fear crashing against the stage. Through the side entrance, a team of men who were definitely not our usual pot-bellied security guards burst in. They wore black tactical vests and moved with a chilling efficiency. They swarmed the stage, creating a perimeter around the two podiums. Two of them grabbed Mr. Miller, who didn't even flinch. He put his hands behind his back before they even asked, his serene smile never wavering. He was a statue of calm in a hurricane of chaos. As they cuffed him, his family on the other side of the stage completely fell apart. Mrs. Miller was on her knees, her perfect pastel polo shirt now crumpled, her face a mask of disbelief and terror as she screamed her husband's name. "David! What did you do? David!" The sons stood like frozen children, their faces pale with shock. They weren't in on it. Whatever this was, he had done it alone. Another guard gently but firmly put a hand on Steve Harvey's shoulder. Steve looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes darting around as if he expected the ceiling to collapse. He allowed himself to be led away, stumbling once as he stepped off the stage, disappearing behind the curtain without a single backward glance. That's when I knew this was real. Steve Harvey never leaves a stage without waving to his audience. My eyes were drawn back to the podium. A man wearing gloves was now carefully examining the note. He used a pair of tweezers to lift it, his movements slow and deliberate, and he read it without unfolding it completely. I was too far away to see the words, but I saw the color drain from his face. I saw him mutter something into the radio on his shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "We have a credible threat. Repeat, the threat is credible." A hand clamped down on my shoulder so hard I yelped. It was Brenda, our showrunner, a woman who could stare down a network executive without blinking. Right now, her face was sheet white. "Leo! Snap out of it!" she yelled over the din. "Grab the bullhorn! Get them out! Technical difficulties. Power failure. Whatever you have to say, just get them out of this building. West exits only. Go!" The command jolted me back into my body. I fumbled for the red bullhorn mounted on the wall, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I ran to the main aisle, my PA instincts finally kicking in over the terror. I raised the horn to my lips, the cheap plastic smelling of dust and panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please!" My voice, artificially loud, boomed through the studio, cutting through some of the noise. "We are experiencing a major power failure. For your safety, please begin evacuating in an orderly fashion through the exits to your left. Please, no running. Everything is under control." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But fear is a powerful motivator. The crowd began to move, a shuffling, terrified herd towards the glowing red signs. I was shouting instructions, trying to keep my voice steady, when they brought Mr. Miller past me. He was flanked by two massive guards, his hands cuffed behind his back. As he drew level with me, he stopped. The guards tried to shove him forward, but he planted his feet, his calm strength a stark contrast to the frantic energy around us. He turned his head, and his eyes, placid, empty, terrifying, found mine again. The chaos of the evacuation seemed to fade into a dull roar. It was just him and me. The serene smile returned to his lips. He leaned towards me as much as the guards would allow, his voice a low whisper that sliced through the noise. "I saw you backstage," he said, his breath smelling faintly of coffee. "You looked thirsty." The guards finally managed to drag him forward and out the doors, his weird, polite words hanging in the air. I stood there, bullhorn in my hand, completely bewildered. What in God's name did that mean? I looked down at my other hand, and my heart stopped. I was still clutching the tall, insulated water bottle I'd prepped for Steve Harvey just before the round started. The bottle I was supposed to hand him during the commercial break that never came. The bottle that was still full to the brim. The water bottle felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My fingers went numb. "You looked thirsty." The words echoed in my head, nonsensical and yet terrifyingly specific. How could he know I was holding this? How could he have seen me in the dim chaos backstage? It was a throwaway line, maybe, the ramblings of a madman. But the way he said it, the way his eyes locked onto mine, it wasn't random. It was a message. Brenda's voice, sharp as a whip, cut through my paralysis. "Leo! What are you doing? The building is not clear." I looked up. The audience was gone, but the studio was now crawling with LAPD and what I assumed was a bomb squad. They moved with a silent, terrifying purpose, unspooling wires and setting up equipment. The air was thick with a new kind of tension, the quiet hum of professionals expecting the worst. "The bottle," I stammered, holding it up like a piece of evidence. "Miller, he said something to me. About the bottle." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She snatched it from my hand, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. She shook it gently next to her ear, then looked at me, her face pale. "This was for Steve?" "Yes," I croaked, my throat dry. "Refilled it right before the last round, from the cooler in the green room." Without another word, she turned and marched towards the man who seemed to be in charge, a grim-faced detective with tired eyes and a badge clipped to his belt. I trailed behind her, feeling like a ghost in my own workplace. The studio, usually a place of manufactured joy and laughter, now felt like a tomb. The giant Family Feud logo on the floor seemed to mock us, its bright colors garish in the harsh emergency lighting. "Detective," Brenda said, her voice strained but steady. "This is Leo, one of our PAs. The suspect, David Miller, said something to him as he was being escorted out. Something about this water bottle." She held it out. The detective took the bottle, not with his bare hands, but with a gloved one, holding it by the very top. He looked from the bottle to me. "What exactly did he say?" "He said, 'I saw you backstage. You looked thirsty.'" The detective's eyes didn't leave mine. "And this bottle was for Mr. Harvey?" "Yes, for the next commercial break." He exchanged a look with one of the bomb squad guys, a silent, heavy communication that I couldn't decipher. The bomb tech came over, carrying a small, sophisticated-looking scanner. He ran it over the bottle, his brow furrowed in concentration. The device let out a series of soft, inconclusive beeps. "Could be anything," the tech muttered. "Plastics, insulation, but I don't like it. We'll take it to the truck. Bag it." As another officer carefully placed my bottle into an evidence bag, the detective turned his full attention to me. "Where's this cooler you mentioned?" "The main green room, just down the hall." "Show me," he commanded. We walked through the now empty backstage area. It was surreal. Half-eaten donuts sat on a craft services table. A rack of sequined dresses for the next taping stood abandoned. It was like the rapture had happened, and we were the only ones left. The detective posted a uniformed officer at the door of the green room before we went inside. The room was exactly as I'd left it. A large, stainless steel water cooler stood against the wall. Next to it was a stack of sealed disposable cups. Everything looked normal. "That's it," I said, pointing. "I filled it from that spigot." The detective knelt down, examining the cooler from every angle. He didn't touch it. He just looked. "Did you see anyone else near this cooler today?" "Anyone at all?" I racked my brain, the day's events a blur of faces and tasks. I don't know. The contestants' families were in and out of here all morning. The Millers, the Garcias, crew members grabbing coffee. "Think," he said, his voice low and intense. "Think about David Miller. Did you see him near this cooler?" I closed my eyes, trying to picture it. The memory surfaced, foggy at first, then sharp and clear. It was earlier, between the first and second show. I'd come in to restock the snacks. Mr. Miller was standing by the cooler, getting a cup of water. He smiled at me, that same placid, empty smile. "Hot under those lights, isn't it?" he'd said politely. I'd just nodded and gone about my business, not thinking anything of it. It was a contestant making small talk. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He was here. Earlier today. He got a drink. He talked to me." The detective stood up slowly. He pulled out his radio. "I need EOD in the main green room, now." He looked at the water cooler, then at me, and a new, chilling realization began to dawn on his face. "The note," he said, more to himself than to me. "The note wasn't the threat." He grabbed my arm. "What was on the note? Did you get a look?" "No," I stammered. He just looked at it and cut the feed." The detective's radio crackled to life. It was a different voice, tinny and laced with static, but the words were crystal clear. "Dispatch, we have an ID on David Miller. He's a former chemical engineer, dishonorably discharged from the military, for manufacturing and testing unauthorized chemical agents." The detective's grip on my arm tightened like a vice. His eyes bored into mine, wide with a terrifying sudden understanding. "Oh my God," he breathed. The note wasn't the threat. It was the antidote. The world tilted on its axis. The note wasn't a bomb threat. It was a ransom note for a cure. My mind reeled, frantically connecting the dots. Miller standing by the cooler. Miller smiling at me. The water bottle in my hand. The note slid silently across the podium. Steve Harvey's face, not just scared, but sickened. It wasn't about an explosion. It was about poison. "Where is Steve?" I gasped, the words catching in my throat. The detective was already moving, shoving me ahead of him out of the green room. "My guys took him to a secure office. He was showing signs of distress." He was shouting into his radio now, a string of codes and commands I didn't understand. "Hazmat protocol! Get a medic team to the executive suite, West Wing. Potential chemical exposure. Subject 0 is Harvey. I repeat, Subject 0 is Harvey." We ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the studio, the flashing red lights of the emergency system, making it feel like a descent into hell. My lungs burned, but all I could think about was Steve, in an office somewhere, not knowing what was happening to him. He'd only had a few sips from his old bottle before I'd swapped it for the full, tainted one. But how much was enough? We burst into a small, windowless office. Steve was sitting on a couch, his head in his hands. Two of the tactical guys stood guard. Brenda was kneeling in front of him, trying to get him to drink from a sealed bottle of spring water. He looked pale, clammy, and his breathing was shallow. He wasn't just in shock. He was physically ill. "Steve!" the detective barked, crossing the room in 3 strides. "Did you touch the note Miller gave you?" Steve looked up, his eyes glassy and unfocused. No, I just looked at it. I didn't touch it." "What did it say?" "It's vital." "What did it say?" Steve's voice was a hoarse whisper. "It said, 'The antidote is in my left pocket. You have 60 seconds before the first symptom. The price is a live broadcast.'" He swallowed hard, a wave of nausea clearly washing over him. "He wanted me to read a list of demands on the air. A manifesto. He said if I did, he'd give me the cure. He said the water was just the beginning." Just then, the man who had bagged my water bottle ran into the room, holding a small plastic vial containing a single white pill. He was followed by a paramedic. "The note was coated," the officer yelled. "Miller's note had a transdermal agent. He didn't even have to ingest it. The note itself was the trigger. We found this in his pocket." The paramedic took the vial, rushing to Steve's side. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Miller hadn't just poisoned the water. He'd created a 2-part chemical weapon of terrifying genius. The water bottle was stage 2, meant to infect hundreds in the studio audience if they were evacuated past the green room or to be released into the building's water supply. But stage 1 was Steve himself. Miller knew Steve would touch the note. The note was coated with a substance, a slow-acting catalyst. The water from the cooler was dosed with the second inert part of the chemical. The two would combine inside Steve's body to create a deadly toxin. He was a walking time bomb. My water bottle was just the fallout. The detective pointed at me. "He was at the cooler. He had access for hours. We need to lock this whole building down. Assume the main water line is compromised." As the paramedic administered the antidote to Steve, a new wave of fear washed over me. He talked to me," I said, my voice trembling. "At the cooler." He smiled at me. I looked down at my hands, suddenly feeling a phantom itch, a burning sensation crawling up my arms. Did I touch the spigot after he did? Did I brush past him? Brenda saw the look on my face. She grabbed my hands, her own steady and firm. Leo, listen to me. You're okay. You didn't drink the water. You didn't touch the note. He was just a monster playing mind games. Hours later, the studio was declared clear. The water cooler had indeed been tampered with, a sophisticated device rigged to release a chemical into the tank. Miller's plan had been meticulous. He assumed Steve would read the note, panic, take a drink of water backstage, and then become a live TV hostage to secure the broadcast of his manifesto. My refilling the bottle just before the final round had been an unforeseen complication, a piece of dumb luck that threw a wrench in his perfect evil machine. When he saw me with the fresh bottle, he knew his primary plan had failed, so he settled for a parting shot of psychological terror. We never went back on air that day. The story that went out was a major gas leak. The Millers were quietly erased from the show's history. David Miller, it turned out, was a disgruntled government chemist who believed he'd been wronged. His manifesto was a rambling, incoherent screed against the world. He was trying to become infamous, and he'd chosen the happiest stage in America to do it. A week later, a black car picked me up and took me to a private office in Beverly Hills. Steve Harvey was sitting behind a large mahogany desk. He looked tired, but the warmth was back in his eyes. He stood up as I came in and shook my hand firmly. "Leo," he said, his voice deep and sincere, "they told me what you did, how you refilled that bottle, how you saw him by the cooler, for a minute there on that stage. I thought my life was over." He gestured for me to sit. "You didn't just do your job that day. You saved my life. You probably saved a lot of lives." He told me the network was giving me a significant bonus and a promotion. He said I'd never have to worry about fetching a water bottle again. We talked for an hour, not as a host and a PA, but as two people who had stood on the edge of a cliff together. As I was leaving, he stopped me at the door. "One more thing," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I think you've earned it." He reached into his desk and pulled out a small framed photo. It was a still from the show, one of his classic exasperated reactions. He'd signed it in silver ink. It read, "To Leo. Thanks for the water. You're my #1 answer on the board." And for the first time in a week, I finally, genuinely laughed.